Picture this, an office, totally silent. Empty desks, a cold, half-full coffee mug just sitting there. This was a startup, and last week, it died. This happens to so many promising companies. So today, we're going to ask the big question. Why do so many startups really fail? We're digging past the cliches and into the uncomfortable truths. So that quote you just saw, "This was supposed to be the next unicorn," that's not just some line we made up. It's from a real founder. A year ago, they'd raised over $2 million. They had a team of 15 people. They launched their shiny new app, and then crickets. That's the epitaph for a dream. And man, it gets written way too often.
All right, let's talk about this number, 90%. We've all heard it, right? 90% of startups fail. But let's be really clear here. This isn't just some motivational line to scare you into working harder. It's a cold, hard statistical reality. And we're about to dissect exactly why this number is so incredibly, stubbornly high.
So, how do we get to the real reasons? Well, we dug through over 100 startup post-mortems. The raw, brutally honest breakdowns from the founders themselves. And what we found leads us right here to our first section, and the undisputed #1 killer of startups: no market need. And just look at the scale of this problem. According to some deep research from CB Insights, a staggering 42% of failed startups point to no market need as the main reason they had to shut their doors. That is almost half of them. It's not about being outmaneuvered by competitors. It's not even about funding. It's about spending all that time and energy building something that nobody actually wanted to buy.
And this quote right here, wow, it just perfectly captures what that 42% feels like for a real person. I mean, can you imagine spending a year and a half of your life pouring your heart and soul into a product only to find out the one fatal flaw? Your target audience, teachers, were just too swamped to even use your solution. It's an absolutely painful and very expensive lesson to learn.
So let's be crystal clear on what no market need actually means. We're not talking about building a buggy or a bad product. A lot of the time, the tech works perfectly. The real failure is building a solution for a problem that just isn't a big enough headache for anyone. It's like a vitamin, not a painkiller. The startup graveyard is absolutely littered with brilliant products that worked perfectly, but just didn't matter enough to anyone. Okay, let's move on to our second section, because this one tackles a belief that is so common, it's almost a default. Let's call it the money myth. Yep, this is the one you hear all the time. It's the go-to excuse. When you ask a founder why their company failed, nearly a third of them will tell you this: "We ran out of cash." It's the official cause of death they write on the certificate. But is that the real story? And that right there is the million-dollar question we have to ask. Is running out of money the actual disease, or is it just the last, most obvious symptom of a much deeper problem? Well, the uncomfortable truth is that running out of cash is just the tip of the iceberg. It's the thing everyone sees, the final dramatic moment. It's the final blow, for sure. But the real damage, that chain of much bigger problems, has been happening right below the surface for a long time. Let's walk through how it actually happens. See, it usually starts with that poor product market fit we just talked about, which then leads to a business model that just doesn't work. Maybe it costs you way too much to get a customer, or people just don't stick around. That, in turn, creates a crazy high cash burn rate. And only then, at the very end of this domino effect, does the bank account finally hit zero. Most startups don't have a sudden crash. They slowly suffocate. This quote from a SaaS founder just nails it. They didn't die because the account was empty. They died because their business model was fundamentally broken. Their customer acquisition cost, the CAC, was 4 times what they'd planned for. They actually died with $120,000 still in the bank because they were smart enough to see that the math just didn't work and they couldn't fix it before the rest of the money vanished. Okay, so we've talked market and we've talked money, but startups aren't just code and spreadsheets, right? They're made of people. And that brings us to our third section, the human factor. And this is where things can get really messy. A great team can navigate almost any storm, but a broken team, it shatters at the first sign of real pressure. We're talking about co-founder blowups, hiring the wrong people, creating a toxic culture, a complete lack of trust. These aren't just soft skills. These things are the absolute foundation of the company. And when that foundation cracks, the whole house comes tumbling down. And this is the sound of that foundation cracking. This founder straight up admits it. They avoided the hard, necessary conversations about where the company was going. And by the time they finally sat down to talk, the damage was already done. The trust was gone. It was just too late. Let's move to our fourth section, which covers another huge pitfall. It's what happens when a founder's greatest strength, their passion, becomes their single biggest weakness. We call this the pivot or perish trap. Have you ever heard feedback like this? It sounds nice, it feels polite, but it's an absolute death sentence for a product. There's a story of one founder who heard this exact phrase 20 times from potential customers, and he still chose to launch. Why? Because he had fallen in love with his solution, not with solving the customer's problem. And this right here, this is the whole game. It's the fork in the road. On one side, you've got the trap, founders who are married to their one specific solution and they're just desperately trying to prove their original idea was right. But on the other side, that's the escape route. These are the founders who are completely obsessed with a customer's problem, and they're willing to adopt reality, even if it means throwing their beautiful original idea right in the trash. All right, we've spent a lot of time dissecting failure. It's uncomfortable, I know, but it's so important. So now let's flip this entire thing on its head. What can we learn from that 10% that actually makes it? Let's dive into some lessons from the survivors in our final section. You know, the patterns among the companies that succeed are just as clear as the ones that fail. And it really all boils down to one thing: humility. They listen way more than they talk. They go talk to users before a single line of code gets written. They are not afraid to be wrong. They figure out how to fail cheap and learn fast. And most of all, they are relentlessly, completely obsessed with their customer, not with their own genius idea. And if you want to boil that entire mindset down to one single idea, this is it. Survivors don't see a failed experiment as a personal defeat. They don't see it as a sign to give up. They see it as clean, objective, valuable data. It's just information that points them toward the right path. Every no is a lesson. Every misstep is progress. So, we're going to leave you with this one final question, because the data is clear. Failure isn't just possible, it's probable. It is the rule, not the exception. So the most important question you can ask isn't, will I fail? But instead, when you inevitably do, how will you make it count? How will you turn that failure, that data, into your next and greatest success?